Most people believe that if you argue well enough, explain clearly enough, and stay patient long enough, eventually the other person will understand. But if you've lived long enough, you probably noticed something unsettling. Some conversations never move toward understanding. No matter how calm you are, no matter how logical your explanation is, the discussion somehow turns into chaos. Your words get twisted, your motives get questioned, and suddenly you find yourself defending things you never even said. Hours later, the conversation is still running through your mind, draining energy from a moment that should have ended long ago. The strange truth is that this isn't a communication problem. It's a pattern of human behavior that certain philosophers understood very well. One of them was Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer believed something uncomfortable but deeply practical. Some people are not trying to discover truth when they argue. They are trying to feel victorious. And the moment you recognize that difference, you realize something powerful. Winning the argument was never the real solution. Walking away was the hidden cost of pointless arguments. There's a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical effort. It isn't the fatigue you feel after a long day of work or after skipping sleep. This exhaustion sits in your chest, behind your eyes, and clings to your mind long after a conversation ends. You know it. It's that feeling when you replay a discussion at 2 in the morning, turning each sentence over and over, wondering how something so trivial could leave you so drained. This mental fatigue usually begins innocuously. Someone says something careless or rude or perhaps even absurd. Your instinct is to respond. You explain yourself. You clarify your intentions. You hope that if you just phrase it clearly enough, the other person will understand. And at first it seems like it might work. Then it doesn't. Instead, the conversation slowly starts to twist. Your carefully reasoned point is ignored while your tone, your history, or your motives become the focus. Suddenly, the discussion isn't about the idea anymore. It's about you. And without realizing it, you're defending yourself instead of the argument you initially made. This is the trap. You expend energy defending your own character while the original point disappears entirely. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer studied these patterns with remarkable clarity. Schopenhauer observed that not all human minds operate on the same principles of reasoning. Some people approach conversation with a genuine desire to understand. They can admit when they are wrong. They can adjust their beliefs when presented with new information. These people are rare, and they are predictable in their behavior, honest, reflective, and flexible. The rest operate differently. For them, being wrong is psychologically unbearable. They have constructed internal systems that prevent them from ever acknowledging error. Their arguments aren't designed to reach truth. They are designed to protect their sense of certainty. And the ways they do this are often so ingrained that it feels logical even to them. They are not consciously trying to manipulate you. They are defending themselves in the only way they know how. Schopenhauer catalogued these tactics in what he called bad faith argumentation. One of the most powerful features of this type of conversation is that the person using it doesn't realize they are doing it. They genuinely believe they are reasonable. And this is why interacting with them is exhausting. Your mind expects the discussion to operate under the rules of reason, while theirs operates under entirely different rules. The result is a cycle that most people don't notice until it has already stolen hours of energy. You clarify a point. They distort it. You explain again. They twist it further. You feel compelled to defend yourself. And somewhere in that loop, you lose track of the original idea entirely. Hours later, you're still turning it over in your mind. The conversation cost you something far more valuable than time. It cost your clarity, your calm, and a fragment of your inner peace. The first step toward escaping this pattern is recognition. Notice when the conversation is no longer about ideas. Notice when defending your reasoning is replaced by defending yourself. When that happens, you are no longer participating in a rational exchange. You are participating in a psychological trap. And the sooner you recognize it, the sooner you can conserve your energy for conversations that actually matter. The first red flag, attacking you instead of the idea. The first warning sign that a conversation is no longer productive appears quickly, often before you even realize it. You present a well-thought-out point, carefully reasoned, grounded in facts or logic. You expect the response to engage with your idea, but instead of addressing what you said, the other person attacks you. Not your argument. You. It starts subtly. A comment on your tone, a critique of your intentions, an accusation about your character. Suddenly, the topic is no longer the idea, it is you. You're only saying that because, or that's typical of someone like you, or you just want to sound smart. The focus has shifted. You are no longer defending your position. You are defending yourself. And this shift is exhausting because you instinctively try to clarify your motives. You try to explain your tone, justify your position, make it clear that your intentions were honest. Schopenhauer recognized this tactic long before modern conversations were filled with social media and endless comment threads. He called it the personal attack extension. It's one of the oldest and most reliable tricks in argumentation. When someone forces the debate onto your character, the substance of your point disappears. Your mind, wired to seek resolution, immediately jumps to self-defense. You feel the pull to respond, to correct their perception of you, and the moment you do, the discussion stops being about ideas. It becomes about emotions, about validation, about defending yourself against perceived attacks. The danger is subtle. Personal attacks can feel like disagreement or criticism, which naturally triggers your need to respond. Most people try to correct the misunderstanding, thinking that once they clarify, the conversation will return to reason, but it rarely does. Once the argument is about you, their goal has shifted. They are no longer interested in understanding. They are seeking dominance. And here's the exhausting part. Their attack feels reasonable to them. They may not even realize that they have abandoned the original discussion. To them, pointing out a flaw in your character or motives is part of the conversation. It is logic, it is truth. And so, the cycle continues. You explain. They attack again. You clarify. They attack again. Each repetition chips away at your focus, your patience, and your mental energy. Recognizing this early is essential. The moment you notice that the conversation has shifted from ideas to personal judgment, you are no longer in a rational debate. You are in a trap designed to consume your attention. Your only real choice is not to win, but to stop feeding the cycle. The sooner you see it, the less energy you waste. This first red flag attacking you instead of your argument is often the clearest and earliest indicator that the person is arguing in bad faith. Once you spot it, you can prepare to disengage before the exhaustion sets in, before your inner calm begins to erode. Awareness is the key. Recognizing that the argument is no longer about the topic itself is the first step toward reclaiming your energy and maintaining your clarity. The second red flag: distorting your words. The second warning sign appears after the first one, often catching you when you think the conversation is back on track. You've already noticed the personal attacks, but now a new pattern emerges. Your words are being twisted. You make a balanced, measured statement careful, nuanced, qualified. Perhaps you hedge a little, acknowledging uncertainty or offering your perspective without absolute certainty. Then instead of addressing your actual point, the other person responds to a version of it that is exaggerated, distorted, or outright unrecognizable. Suddenly you're being argued against for something you never said. For example, you might say, "I think this approach has some merit, but it could also have drawbacks." And they respond, "So you're saying this is the only way to handle everything, and anyone who disagrees is wrong?" That's the distortion. They've taken your words, stretched them past recognition, and now they have a target they can defeat without ever engaging with your actual idea. Schopenhauer referred to this as extension, the deliberate exaggeration or misrepresentation of an argument to make it vulnerable. The most exhausting aspect is the compulsion you feel to clarify. You immediately correct them. "No, that's not what I meant," I said, and the cycle repeats. They twist it again. You clarify again. They stretch it further. Soon the discussion has no resemblance to your original point. You've been pulled into a loop, endlessly defending a distorted version of yourself or your words instead of the original idea. This tactic serves a psychological function for them. It avoids any possibility of being wrong. If they actually addressed your real statement, they might have to concede a point. By arguing against a version they control, they can maintain the illusion of victory while never exposing themselves to intellectual risk. In other words, distortion is a shield. Recognizing this pattern early is critical. When the conversation begins to drift away from what you actually said, when your clarifications are consistently ignored or twisted, you are no longer in a rational exchange. You are feeding a mechanism that exists solely to keep you engaged while they remain unchallenged. This is why so many people leave these discussions feeling mentally drained. Hours of focus, logic, and effort have been invested in defending not a point, but a shadow of the point and echo of your original statement, manipulated into something else entirely. And because the distortion is subtle at first, it often takes a while before you realize that your energy is being siphoned away. The key insight here is that not every argument is about truth, and not every opponent is playing the same game. When someone distorts your words, it's not a sign of misunderstanding, it's a signal. The conversation is no longer about shared understanding, it is about control, dominance, and the extraction of your mental energy. Once you see this clearly, you gain a choice. You can continue to feed the loop, clarifying endlessly, or you can disengage. Awareness gives you the power to protect your attention and preserve your inner calm. The moment you recognize the distortion pattern, you step out of the trap before it drains you further. The third red flag, using certainty as a weapon. The third warning sign emerges when you realize the other person treats your honesty as vulnerability. This one is subtle, but it is especially dangerous because it targets the very people most willing to think carefully, to admit uncertainty, and to remain intellectually honest. When you approach a conversation with humility, you might say, "I'm not entirely sure about this," or "This is just my perspective," or "I could be wrong, but here's what I think." To you, these statements are signs of reasoned thought. They acknowledge complexity. They leave room for dialogue. To someone operating in bad faith, however, humility is a weakness. They do not see your openness as honesty. They see it as an opportunity to dominate. Where you allow for nuance, they demand absolutes. Where you acknowledge uncertainty, they assert certainty. Every statement they make is unqualified, definitive, and delivered with a confidence designed to intimidate. This approach serves a psychological function. Admitting doubt or error is uncomfortable. It exposes the possibility of being wrong. For certain people, this is not just unpleasant. It is intolerable. They have built a mental system that protects them from ever facing that discomfort. Certainty, even if it is superficial or unexamined, becomes a shield. Absolute statements feel like power. Humility feels like surrender. Schopenhauer understood this deeply. Genuine thinking, he argued, always contains some uncertainty. The world is complex. Absolute certainty is rarely justified. Those who speak in absolutes constantly are not necessarily wiser. They are protecting themselves from the psychological cost of self-reflection. They are defending identity, not truth. The danger for you is twofold. First, their confidence can feel convincing, even when their reasoning is flawed. You instinctively want to match their certainty with evidence, examples, or logic. And second, because you are honest about your limitations, they interpret it as weakness. They push harder, argue louder, and seek to overwhelm you emotionally. This creates a subtle trap. You expend energy not only defending your ideas, but defending your right to uncertainty itself. Every response you make is another mental effort to justify your own reasoning process. Hours of focus vanish in the process. By the end, you are exhausted, not because you failed to think clearly, but because the conversation was never designed to engage with clarity. Recognizing this pattern is essential. When someone consistently treats uncertainty as weakness, you are no longer in a rational discussion. You are participating in a game where vulnerability is punished and domination is rewarded. Continuing to engage will always be draining. The key insight here is liberation. Once you see that their certainty is a defense mechanism rather than insight, you stop internalizing it. Their confidence no longer dictates your energy, your focus, or your peace of mind. You realize the argument is not about truth, it is about control. And when you internalize that, you gain the freedom to respond differently, to preserve your calm, and to avoid the exhaustion that comes from arguing with someone whose mind is designed to resist change. The fourth red flag, endless moving goalposts. The fourth warning sign is slower to emerge, but it is just as destructive and in many ways even more exhausting. This is the pattern of endless shifting, where no argument ever truly reaches a conclusion. Every time you resolve one point, a new one appears. Every moment of apparent agreement is quickly replaced by a new grievance. At first, it can feel subtle. You might think, maybe I misunderstood, or maybe this person just has a lot on their mind. But over time, a pattern emerges. One discussion flows into another, one complaint becomes two, one clarification invites yet another critique. Topics slide and shift like water around obstacles, never confronting the core issue. By the time you notice, hours have passed and the conversation has gone nowhere. Schopenhauer observed this pattern in countless interactions. He realized that some people argue not to arrive at truth, not to understand, not to resolve anything. For them, the conflict itself is the point. Disagreement is a familiar environment, a stage where they feel comfortable and powerful. The argument is not a problem to solve, it is an experience to dominate. Engaging with this type of person is fundamentally different from normal discussion. When you attempt to bring closure, they shift the goalposts. When you clarify, they change the turns. When you agree on one aspect, they introduce a new topic that makes you feel like the prior discussion never happened. Every attempt to stabilize the conversation is met with movement, keeping you perpetually off balance. The effect on your mind is profound. You expend energy constantly adjusting, explaining, justifying, and defending. Your focus is fragmented. Your patience erodes. Your mental clarity begins to feel thinner, more brittle. By the end, it's as if you've been arguing with a shadow, a moving target that is impossible to pin down. Recognizing this pattern early is critical. If the same person repeatedly creates conversations where points never settle, where clarity is impossible, you are witnessing the manifestation of a will that resists reason entirely. Schopenhauer described these interactions as an inevitable drain of energy. They are not merely frustrating, they are fundamentally incompatible with rational exchange. The lesson here is subtle but powerful. Some people are not participating in the same game you are. They are not exchanging ideas, they are asserting dominance. They are not seeking truth. They are seeking control over the flow of conversation, and continuing to play the game on their terms is always costly. Once you understand the fourth red flag, you gain insight into a new kind of freedom. You no longer expect resolution in situations designed to resist it. You begin to see the patterns before you are already exhausted. And when you see the pattern, you gain the ability to step back before the conversation steals your energy, your clarity, or your peace of mind. The key here is early recognition. If you can spot the moving goalposts before they fully drain you, you can choose not to engage. You can conserve your resources for interactions that actually matter, for exchanges where understanding is possible, and for relationships where dialogue is genuinely productive. The Schopenhauer mindset shift. Once you've learned to recognize the patterns of exhausting conversations, the personal attacks, the distortions, the weaponized certainty, and the moving goalposts, you reach a critical insight. Schopenhauer called it a mindset shift, and it's the difference between feeling perpetually drained and reclaiming your mental energy. The first part of this shift is simple but often difficult to internalize. Not every mind works like yours. Some people are capable of honest self-reflection. They can admit mistakes. They can update their beliefs when presented with evidence. They operate with reason and nuance, but others cannot. For these people, being wrong is unbearable. Their ego cannot tolerate it, and their mind constructs elaborate defenses to protect their certainty. These defenses may include twisting your words, treating humility as weakness, attacking your character, or endlessly shifting the argument. And most importantly, they operate unconsciously. They believe they are being reasonable. To them, these behaviors feel like logic. Understanding this is liberating because it reframes the exhaustion. When you feel drained after a conversation like this, it isn't because you failed or weren't persuasive. You weren't failing because the conversation was never meant to be rational in the first place. Your logic, your clarity, your careful reasoning thus were never the tools needed to succeed in that environment. Schopenhauer's insight is radical in its simplicity. Stop expecting reason to work where reason does not operate. Your frustration, your sense of wasted effort, arises from misapplied expectations. You brought a hammer to a job designed for a screwdriver, or more accurately, to a situation where no tool could succeed. The second part of the mindset shift is equally important. Their behavior is not about you. When someone attacks you personally, distorts your words, or responds with contempt, it is not a reflection of your worth. It is an expression of their will, their internal psychological structure, their need to protect themselves. They cannot assess your value rationally because their mind is preoccupied with self-preservation and dominance. When you internalize this, something remarkable happens. The moment you stop taking their behavior personally, their power over your nervous system disappears. Their words no longer provoke anxiety, defensiveness, or compulsive explanation. You regain the clarity that was previously siphoned away by their arguments. The third component of Schopenhauer's shift is the embrace of disengagement, not as surrender, but as a deliberate choice. Silence is not weakness. Walking away from a futile discussion is not failure. The wise person preserves their inner life, protecting attention, focus, and peace from being wasted on interactions that offer nothing in return. Schopenhauer himself lived this philosophy. He avoided endless disputes, removed himself from relationships that offered friction without understanding, and valued his inner clarity above all. What many misinterpreted as bitterness was actually discernment. He calculated the cost of engaging and chose peace over empty victory. This mindset shift transforms how you interact with the world. You no longer enter arguments hoping to convert the unconvertible. You stop chasing validation from those who cannot provide it. You preserve your energy, your focus, and your calm, and you reserve engagement for people and situations where it can actually bear fruit. In short, once you adopt the Schopenhauer mindset, you stop participating in losing battles that were never yours to win. You begin to reclaim your inner life, step by step, conversation by conversation. The discipline of disengagement. Modern culture often teaches that silence means defeat. If someone challenges you, you're expected to respond. If someone criticizes you, you must defend yourself. Schopenhauer disagreed completely. He believed the wisest response to many arguments is simply withdrawal, not dramatic withdrawal, not angry withdrawal, just quiet disengagement. Your attention is a resource. Your emotional energy is limited. Every argument you enter consumes part of that resource. When the conversation offers no possibility of understanding, continuing the discussion only wastes what you cannot replace. Sometimes the most powerful sentence you can say is a simple one: "We see this differently." And then you stop. No further explanation, no final debate, just silence. Protecting your inner life. Schopenhauer valued something most people overlook: the quality of one's inner life. Your thoughts, your peace, your clarity. He believed careless social interactions often destroy this inner space. People spend enormous energy maintaining arguments that produce nothing. They chase approval from individuals who offer none. They engage in debates that were never meant to be resolved. And in the process, they sacrifice something far more valuable than time. They sacrifice mental tranquility. Schopenhauer chose a different path. He guarded his attention carefully. He refused unnecessary conflicts. He preferred solitude over meaningless interaction. Many people misunderstood this choice. They saw it as pessimism. But in reality, it was discipline. Because the moment you understand how easily your energy can be wasted, you begin protecting it. And once you start protecting it, something surprising happens. Your mind becomes quieter, your thoughts become clearer, and the arguments that once consumed you begin to feel strangely irrelevant, not because you finally defeated them, but because you realized you never needed to fight them in the first place.